Hello, this is the spoiler-filled review of Toll the Hounds by Steven Erikson, the 8th book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. If you don't want spoilers, click the review above. Otherwise, let's go. Toll the Hounds, the 8th book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. I have been very intimidated by this spoiler review for a couple of reasons. One, this is the longest Malazan Book of the Fallen, and I'm pretty sure the longest single fantasy work that I've ever read. It is long, it is complicated, its themes are very profound, and I've just been nervous about doing this. I think it's going to be really long, but this is perhaps my favorite Malazan book. We'll have to see. I'll do a ranking of them in a little bit. But Toll the Hounds is truly a fantastic read. Just to sum up a couple things I said on my spoiler-free review, if you didn't watch that, I think this is a fantastic book. I love some of the elements that are new that are added to the story. Coming back to Darujistan and Ganabakis feels like coming home. Something is familiar about it after all of the world hopping of the last couple of books in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. Some characters just feel good, like Crocus and Carso, just feel very comfortable. Love how this book explores Anomander Rake and a couple other characters in deeper, more profound ways. I do think the Namander Tist-Andi wandering storyline, which is a big part of this work, is a bit long and meandering at times, and especially the character of Clip is very annoying, very frustrating, and a large part of this book is that group of people. And it does have a payoff at the end, especially with Namander, of course, and what happens to Clip at the end with the Dying God. But for the most part, I think that storyline is what keeps this from perfection. But overall, I love Toll the Hounds. It is a fantastic work of fantasy fiction. So basic plot overview, we're picking up in Ganabakis after the events of Memories of Ice, and so this book is basically a tale of the two major cities on Ganabakis that we know. Coral, which is now called Black Coral, and Darujistan. Let's start out in Black Coral, which is now basically a city for Tist-Andi. It's ruled by Anomander Rake, who dwells in the citadel that has been made for the Tist-Andi. Kurald Galain has now basically inhabited the city in some way, and so it's literally dark all the time. There's no sun, there's no day, there's no night. It's just all night to accommodate the Tist-Andi. Obviously, they're not using Moonspawn anymore, which has been sent out as a grave for the bridge burners, and so they just dwell in this city. And so for the most part, the humans in the city dwell a little ways out from Coral in a new settlement that is gathering where there is day and night, and there's of course the Barrow to the Redeemer. And that has built up this cult around the Redeemer, and there's starting to become a hierarchy, and there's a high priestess that we meet along with several other somewhat nefarious folks that are around about the cult of the Redeemer. And a large part of this story revolves around the interaction between the Tist-Andi and this new cult and the pioneers who are coming to lay things down at the Barrow and the remnants of the Panian Domain. So there's a lot of different elements that are working together to create tension in Coral. We see this conflict really through the eyes of 3 or 4 characters, I guess. The main 2, I would say, is Spinnick and the Seer Doman. So Spinnick is what we first think is sort of this lowly Tist-Andi normal, but he is in fact a high-ranking and great swordsman with Tist-Andi, who does know Anomander Rake and has been with him since the beginning. He has befriended someone that we just know as Seer Doman. I don't know if this is confirmed, but my instinct is that he was one of the guards, sort of the more kindly guard that is guarding Tok the Younger in Memories of Ice. Again, I don't know if that's confirmed. That's sort of like my headcanon. And he is obviously dealing with the Seer Doman is dealing with a lot of guilt for his part in this awful regime But he seems like this guy who really wants to do the right thing, but is racked with guilt and depression because of what has happened very recently in his life. Spinach is drawn to this guy because he is good, and they're friends, and they play this board game, this complicated board game together. But it's quite clear that he sees reflected in the Sir Domen the plight of Tist-Andi as a whole, that they have done things they're not proud of, or they have been fighting for so long, they don't have a home, they seem somewhat lost, and so they bond over this as well as just become friends in the taverns. So that's kind of where this story starts out with, sort of a question of what does the Tist-Andi do next. I mentioned the tavern where they're playing this board game, and that's important because there's this new drink, is all the rage in Coral, called Kellic. I think I'm saying that right. And it seems to intoxicate in a different way, in sort of a more existential way, I guess, than alcohol normally does. And it's sold cheaply, and it's somewhat tied to the cult of the Redeemer, or people who are coming to it. Obviously, that's going to be very important. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Also, I should mention Endis Salan is a old wizard or mage with the Tist-Andi. He's kind of been burned out after his months of magic, especially the Assault on Pale, and he is struggling with his worthlessness now that he is not as powerful as he once was. So this, you'll see a theme in this novel is definitely like guilt and failure from the past and from history dogging someone into their present and really affecting how they think about the world. Obviously the Tist-Andi as a whole, but specifically Spinach and Endis Salan, even Anomander Rake are dogged by their pasts and the guilt associated with that, and it draws them to seek redemption, which is another huge theme in this work. Redemption. The Cult of the Redeemer is a big part of that. I mean, it's called the Redeemer. I think there's some justification to draw parallels with Christianity and how it's used in our Western society and has been used, and how that idea of redemption is used well or not well by that religion for society as a whole and for individuals dealing with guilt. So some really profound themes happening in this work. Speaking of the Tist-Andi and dealing with past guilt, we have to talk about Namander and the children of Anomander Rake that were with the Malazans but are now trying to get back to Anomander Rake and the Tist-Andi, and so they're sort of wandering the southern part of Genabacchus. They are now accompanied by Clip, who is claiming to be, I think, Herald, maybe Mortal Sword of High House Dark, and he is as douchebaggy as he has been in previous works. He is coming to confront Anomander Rake, or so he says. They start coming across in the southern regions a different cult, not of the Redeemer, but of the Dying God. And it's not necessarily, I guess it is a cult, but it's really this ideology that has started to take over in the wake of the depression of the Pannonian Seer. And in my reading of it, the Dying God is the whole cult and belief around this is a reflection of utter despair, people being hurt by the world around them and wanting to cause hurt because they have been hurt, and causing this vicious cycle. And so this land has been ravaged by the Pannonian Seer, and the Dying God basically has been, like it says, dying, and so he starts taking over these people, and the main use of this is Kellic, with that drink, that once people drink it, they really start to become overtaken by this despair or power that causes them to do terrible, awful things and lose their mind, and that really is how the Cult of Dying God is taking over this area. And again, I think that's a profound look at what can happen in the aftermath of trauma, and how pain begets pain begets pain, and that begets despair and hatred and all of these other terrible things that create this awful, vicious cycle. Ultimately leading to vengeance, which is this all-consuming desire that just really destroys. Interesting there is that they meet up with Calor, who becomes a very complicated character in this work, and one that eventually I feel sorry for. He is sort of the ultimate manifestation of this, like centuries and centuries of having pain caused upon him, and so he just continually causes pain. and it sort of makes sense in his mind when we're in it, but anytime you step outside of that mindset, it's just this awful, sad story. And so Calor is really a metaphor that is personified as the end of vengeance, just this sad, hollow character that really should be pitied rather than anything else. His part in this story, I think, is very profound, especially because when you think about it, he is still a mortal, but he has been cursed with this curse of continuing forever. And so I think it is Erikson's critique of humanity as a whole and where vengeance brings us. As I said, this storyline overall is interesting, and I enjoyed parts of it, but it does go on long. It has some confusing elements, sort of meanders for a little while, especially as they're going through like villages of the Kellic people. To me, sometimes it kind of brings down the rhythm that we get from Choral and from Darujistan. So okay, but not great. One thing I did want to mention is the great dialogue that happens between, I think, Gothos, and they have this long philosophical discussion. And I wanted to point this out because there is legitimately a Socratic dialogue between Plato and Aristotle in this discussion. So Skintic and, which is one of the Tistandi, Calor is talking, and then the Jagat is discussing this. And so Skintic says, "You spoke of a wolf god. You began to tell us a story." And then this is Gothos. "So I did, but you must be made to understand. It is a question of essences. To see a wolf and know it is a pure one must possess an image in oneself of a pure wolf, a perfect wolf." So this is almost literally Plato word for word. The Platonic forms, the ideals, a perfect wolf. "Ridiculous," Calor grunted. "See a strange beast and someone tells you it is a wolf. And from this one memory, and perhaps a few more to follow, you have fashioned your image of a wolf. In my empires, philosophers spewed such rubbish for centuries." So, and that's the Aristotelian tradition, right? Tabula rasa. You are a blank form, and then through your observation, you steadily gain understandings of the world, and that is how things have their beings or their forms. You understand it from observation. It is not from an ethereal otherness. So this is like a classic philosophical dialogue that has been just like sprinkled into a high fantasy work. I just love that. And actually it goes on. There's a back and forth a little bit more. I just needed to reference how awesome that is. Now we need to talk about the second city in the Tale of Two Cities, which is Darujistan. And Darujistan is really the core of this book. Choral and all the other stuff is interesting and important part of this, but for me the heart of this story is Darujistan, the bridge burners that have started the inn and bar at Hyrule Tower. That is Picker, Blend, Ansi, Blue Pearl, and a handful of others like Drukir, but those four are really the ones that do most of the action and perspective shots. For some reason, a guild contract with the Assassin's Guild has been taken on to kill them. And we don't really know why at first, and in fact, what's interesting is at the end of the day, it's not that important to the story in Toll the Hounds. The Toll the Hounds story actually expands greater than that contract itself. That contract itself is, I assume, explored in an Esselmont novel, because it seems to be you're accidentally sort of intersecting in a story. But that really kicks off this drama in Darujistan, because at the same time that this plot is unfolding is when Crocus, who is now still calling himself Cutter, Skilara, Char, and Barathol are all coming back with spite to Darujistan. So this return also sets off a series of events and reawakenings that, again, all these smaller plot points intersect and eventually lead to the ultimate convergence that happens at the end. Cutter's storyline is incredibly interesting. Again, dealing with redemption, he is feeling pain and immense loss and guilt over what happened with Apsalar and how they grew apart and how their love really broke down through their various misadventures. And this leads him to examine his past, and he actually starts to reignite his romance. There's never really romance in Guardians of the Moon, but his tist with Chalice. And actually we get a lot of Chalice's point of view, which I actually think is quite a beautiful idea by Erikson to show us where her decisions made, and she is also dealing with feeling trapped in the current life that she has chosen for herself. I'm simplifying this story. There's a lot of complicated things about her and the various different council members and how they are maneuvering themselves, but in the end, at least for the story in Toll the Hounds, I don't view that sort of a red herring plot. The main heart of it is the character of Cutter sort of trying to become Crocus again. What I mean by that is I see that as two parts of himself. Crocus is the true person who is kind, who is caring, who wants to do the right thing, who fights for good. And there is Cutter, who has sort of been beaten up and lost his soul and almost is just this killing machine without remorse, without thoughtfulness, very hollow. He has to make a choice in this book. Who does he want to be between these two people? He has felt that to love Apsalar, he needs to turn himself into Cutter, and that process has turned himself into Cutter. But I think who he is actually is Crocus, and so it's this tension and this love affair with Chalice is forcing him to choose one or the other. And actually, I think, ironically, the end of the day, he makes the choice against Chalice to be Crocus. And again, ironically, I think that is who Apsalar always wanted. So it's really interesting, rounded story with Crocus that I find very enjoyable. The Chalice storyline, just to get ahead of that, because I don't think I'm going to mention it later on, is completely tragic. She feels caught in these situations. She feels caught in these political games. She is young. She is over her head, and it eventually leads to her suicide. And it's completely a tragedy. Other stories in Darujistan is Torvald Nam returns. We haven't seen him since House of Chains. We know him as sort of the buddy cop to Carso Orlon and sort of this weird journey that they went on together, but now he's back in Darujistan. We meet his wife, we meet some of his friends, and he is now, again, he's sort of dogged by a past and by mistakes that he has made and that he hasn't been faithful to his wife as he should be. He gets a job as a captain of the guard for this new rich landlord, or I should say landlady or council lady, and eventually that actually turns out to be Vorkin, who is working closely with Ralik Nam, and so he is reunited with his cousin, and their relationship is brought together. One storyline we absolutely have to touch on is Murillo's storyline in Darujistan. So Murillo has helped Cole become this respected councilman again, but now he is struggling with what the purpose of his life is. Early on in the novel, he's having this affair with a woman, and then actually has an affair with that same woman's daughter, who is incredibly younger than him, and the man who is courting this young woman walks in on them having sex and stabs Murillo. And this brings him into this huge existential crisis about what his life means. Does he want to just be this womanizing flop the rest of his life? He doesn't find meaning in this, and eventually he finds someone else who is really struggling, and that is Stony. Unfortunately, we find out that the rape that occurred with Stony, in Memories of Ice, has brought forth a child. This child's name is Harlow, and Stony has been neglecting him for obvious reasons and says that he can only see her rapist, and is basically dropped him off with another family that the parents take care of him, but another son in that family abused him. His name's Harlow. We get a lot of his perspective and his journey in this book I'll get to in a moment. Stony for me is such a sad story. She starts a dueling school, long story short, and Murillo actually comes and starts working for her as a good duelist, and they start forming a bond and actually a loving relationship where both of them are really broken about sort of this existential crisis they've gone on. They've been wandering, they're not sure about life, and they really find meaning with each other. Unfortunately, I should say, Murillo really starts to find meaning in this life. Stony is still very reserved and doesn't really want to show love to anyone, including Murillo, despite finding this person who really cares about her. And unfortunately, in the middle of this hubbub, Harlow, as I mentioned, is living with this other family, and the evil other son actually attacks Harlow while they're out in the countryside, nearly to death. But Harlow is not killed. He's found by a shepherd who actually sells him into slavery, basically, at the mines outside of Darujistan, where he's working in a very dangerous occupation. Again, these are overlapping because that mine is owned by Shalice's husband, who is this new and up-and-coming councilman, along with another smithy of the underworld lord who are working together. And Murillo, again, because he loves Stony and he wants to help her, starts to look for Harlow. So Murillo eventually tracks down. I'm going through this very quickly because there's so much in this book, but this storyline is so effective. And at this point, you're rooting for Murillo to really be able to find Harlow and bring him back. And then really they can be like a family unit of these people who have gone through such hardship together, form this bond through chaos, really. So Murillo goes out, he finds them, and then he is able to challenge the council member, who is Shalice's husband, is there, and they duel. And actually, it's this amazing sequence where we are sure that Murillo is going to win because he's this great duelist, but he actually does indeed die. A brutal, devastating moment because we think Murillo just reached the point where he is really going to use this selfless act to propel himself to greatness, or if not greatness, at least happiness, and then he falls in this duel with this real maniac at this point that we really do not like. But fortunately, Crocus is also on Murillo's trail because he wants to protect him and find Harlow, this kid, and he actually comes and gets revenge in this awesome sequence where he tricks the council member into allowing him to assassinate him, basically. And it's this brilliant moment where all that Cutter has been dealing with comes to the fore, where he is able to avenge the wrongful death of Murillo, but in such a way that he is able to sort of cast aside his Cutter legacy, because he sees this is where it leads, he sees the violence, he sees he doesn't want to be this. And the big moment is later on when he introduces himself to Carso, who he meets. He introduces himself as Crocus, which is the first time he's done that, I think, since Dead House Gate. So this is a huge character moment, not just obviously for Murillo because he has died, and not only for Harlow, who's eventually able, because of this, to unite with his mother, Stony, but for Crocus as well. Finally, I should say a brief bit about Gruntle, who is back in Darujistan, and he obviously still has feelings for Stony, but she, as I said earlier, is broken over all of these things that are happening in her life and really cold towards him. But he, because he also is, this broken man from the campaigns down in Coral, can't do what Murillo does, which is push through and in a self-sacrificial love way embrace and love Stony for who she is. He joins the Triggle Trade Guild and starts to go on a campaign caravan with them to bring Mappo back to Akarium. So that's really all that happens in that storyline here, but it's definitely worth mentioning for what happens in future books. The other major storyline before I want to talk about the end of this book, because the end of this book is phenomenal, let's talk about Carso Orlon. In this book, basically all he is doing is traveling to Darujistan from the coast of Genabakis, where he has finally landed with Somar Dev, and they continue their sort of flirtatious love-hate relationship, and they meet up with Traveler, who we find out in this book is Dasam Ultor. He has a very interesting conversation with Shadowthrone and Cotillion, where that's revealed, and he is on his way to kill Death, to kill Hood. And this is definitely, again, fitting with this theme of people who are dealing with a lot of guilt and disappointment in their past by looking for an ultimate sort of sacrifice or selfless act or revenge or something to redeem them. It's all around this idea of redemption and dealing with one's past. Carso, of course, with chains going on behind him, also has this very deep past, and that leads him on this continual crusade to make right what he has done wrong, and it comes back to him in a very interesting way at the end. We're not going to talk to that yet, but I did want to touch on one amazing scene, which is the moving kingdom on the plains, the Lameth Plains. So that's this big plain area, and in the midst of this there's someone who's merely known as the captain. He's this man who's been imbibed, sort of Quick Ben style, by a bunch of different spirits, and that has kept him alive a long time and allowed him to build this kingdom on wheels, as they call it. He has this huge carriage, and there are always I think 1,000 soldiers that are marching with him, and he has these cavalry units that are going out and finding people on the plains, and he basically plunders and is this king of thieves, literally, riding around this area, and has thousands of slaves that pull this carriage. He's kind of this perfect picture of humanity's desire to be a lord over everything and to bring everything around them under subjugation to them. Carso just comes and destroys this kingdom single-handedly. He frees the slaves, he kills the captain in this very interesting way, where same thing that happened with the crippled god when it offered power to Carso. When the captain sees him coming, he invites him to dinner and offers him his kingdom as his heir because he doesn't have any male heirs. And the spirits flee from Carso, so the man knows that he is dying. And as usual, Carso does not take the power. He says no, and it destroys this kingdom and this oppression, and he frees all of these slaves. And there's this great line during the dinner between Carso and this captain. And the captain says, "You are my heir." He's trying to talk Carso into being his heir, as I said. "No, I'm not. Slavery is an abomination. Slavery is what people who hate do to others. They hate themselves. They hate in order to make themselves different, better. You told yourself you had the right to own other people. You told yourself they were less than you, and you thought shackles could prove it." Then the captain says, "I loved my slaves. I took care of them." And then Carso has this biting retort. "There is plenty of room for guilt in the heart of hate," the warrior replied. A fantastic, devastating blow to this captain's worldview that gave him the justification to be this awful person that he was. So the Carso storyline is fantastic. Eventually, he and Traveler form this bond, and they do make it to Darujistan in time for the convergence. Let's talk ending, because the end of this book, and by end I mean the last 300 to 400 pages, are incredible. If you see anything written about this, or you go to reactions, despite what some people might think of the book as a whole, it is generally agreed that this is one of the best endings in the Malazan series, and everyone is right. It is an incredible, incredible finish. The length of some other whole novels, again, last 400 pages, are just epic payoff insanity. So good. So I'm going to try to explain the plan as I understand it. I'm sure I will leave out parts because it's complicated. It's been building for several books, and I think things like the Karkanos trilogy, I haven't read that yet, but that might make things more clear. But this is the basic plan that I understand. In his despair and his seeking for redemption, Anomander Rake devises this plan to force Mother Dark to come back from her exile, and so give the Tist and D purpose and allow his whole people to thrive. This would take help from many different ascendants and gods to make this happen. So at this convergence in Darujistan, a couple things needed to happen. That's why he stopped killing people with Dragnapur. We hear way back, actually, in Gardens of the Moon, that Rake has not been killing as many people with Dragnapur, and so the heart of Carso Orlon that is in the wagon, the heart of darkness, Joseph Conrad reference, perhaps, is not being pulled effectively away from chaos. Because the whole idea behind Dragnapur is it was created to keep darkness from chaos, centering it in a physical location in this warren, and then having it pulled by these souls that were killed by the sword. And chaos would ever be coming across it, but wouldn't catch him. Because Anomander had stopped killing so many people, and people eventually run out of energy in their eternal torment in Dragnapur, chaos was starting to overtake the heart of darkness, the warren of dark. So this was part of trying to force Mother Dark to confront her people and the wrong that they did to her and vice versa. But I guess Anomander Rake did not think even that was enough. He needed to have a personal sacrifice and to show his willingness to reconcile. And so, as part of this, wants to defeat Chaos, or at least attack Chaos. And so he enlists Hood's help, who has his own reasons for wanting to no longer be the god of death, or at least in the role that he was. And so, when they meet at Darujistan, there's this incredible moment where Anomander just cuts off Hood's head, and that allows Hood to get into Dragnapur's warren, and there, because he is there, he can summon his army of the dead, which includes the Bridgeburners and Iskar Jurak / Whiskey Jack. They can fight the forces of Chaos long enough for Anomander Rake himself, who is defeated by Traveler, to go into his own warren of Dragnapur, and then he can go to the Heart of Darkness, make a sacrifice with the Eye of the Child God, and with that sacrifice open a portal for him to go to Mother Dark, and in so doing destroy himself by going through the Chaos warren. That brings Mother Dark's attention, and she also, in some way, I think, protects the Heart of Darkness of the warren, or takes it somewhere else, or something along those lines. Her presence makes that disappear, which is why the Chaos warren also eventually disappears and Dragnapur is no more. Whew. I think that's the plan. Definitely in the comments, there should be a lot of discussion about this, and the beautiful thing about Malazan is that there's a lot of details, but that's kind of the overarching thing. But let's talk about each of those things individually. First of all, perhaps the greatest sequence in this book, and potentially the entire Malazan book, is when Death enters Darujistan. The cinematic, epic, grand nature of that entrance is phenomenal. First off, we get Kaz's wife. I forget her name, but she is, I guess, the Mason of High House Death, or at least she says she is, and we know she's been preparing something in the garden, and it's actually the portal by which Hood is going to enter Darujistan. He's able to do that by the blood of Kaz and all the things that he's killed, leading up to this moment. When he is killed, all that blood allows Hood to come bodily, because remember, it takes a lot of power for a god to actually be impersonated physically, and obviously he had to do that so he could be killed. But as soon as he enters Darujistan, we have this amazing sequence where we are going from person to person to person, seeing what the presence of death does. It brings death sort of sometimes in like a Final Destination way, where weird things happen and people die automatically, or sometimes in a just way where someone who is abusing people dies, sometimes in an unjust way, and it really shows sort of the leveling force of Death and Hood, and it is such a grand entrance. And then, on top of all this, after this amazing entrance, we have that great moment where this honorable guard is killed, and Hood just says, "No, not this time," and heals him. So we see this incredible character, sort of his curse of like what death does to people around him, but then that he is at heart sort of caring, and it puts us in a positive light for Hood. And then, of course, he meets Anomander Rake, who his entrance into Darujistan is incredible, where he just unleashes Dragnapur, and the visuals of the book are off the chain. And I mean, Hood getting his head chopped off by Dragnapur is like one of the OMG moments of any fantasy series I've ever read, ever. It's just phenomenal, truly epic in scale. To zoom out a little bit, we have Calor also drawn to the power, and we are nervous about that because we don't want Calor to get Dragnapur or to, in some ways, mess up whatever the plans are. We don't know what that is. And this is where Spinnick comes back into play, who we talked about a little bit earlier, being in Black Coral. He is now here, and he fights valiantly against Calor, who's this obviously very good swordsman, basically until the morning, delaying him just long enough where he can't get involved in all of this. And it's this amazing moment where Spinnick both of them are actually very oddly honorable about this whole thing, but Spinnick is honorable and not even seeking to hurt Calor, he's trying to delay him. And then Calor sadly kills him, or at least he thinks, and moves on, but it's been long enough where that doesn't happen. Oh, no, I'm forgetting that he's about to kill him, Spinach. And then Corlot and her brother, Othanatel, I'm forgetting his name, they actually intervene. The brother takes Calor away, and they fight in the sky, and I think the brother dies. And then Corlot, there's so much to remember in this book, man. And then Corlot actually saves Spinach and heals him before he dies. So he actually doesn't die, just has this great moment of redemption in stopping Calor from getting here, which is what Anomandarake asked him to do, and they both thought it was a death sentence. Beautiful. So Traveler, if you remember, his whole thing was he was going to kill Hood, so he comes and sees that Hood is already dead by Anomandarake's hand, and they end up fighting. And amazingly enough, Traveler does win, and we're not really sure if it was that Traveler defeated him, although we know Traveler is an excellent swordsman and like an ascendant in his own right. The way I understand it, his Dragnaper rebounds and hits him in the forehead. And that is what causes him to die, which is obviously what he wanted, because he wanted to go into Dragnaper. We don't really know exactly how Dragnaper works. I imagine that it can't be like, just a small cut is going to get him into Dragnaper, and that he had to like die for real. So I imagine there was a combination of things of Anomandarake letting it happen, and the skill and movement of Traveler, who is devastated by this, doesn't take Dragnaper for himself, but there's this moment where there are all these forces that are trying to get the power of Dragnaper, while Anomandarake is in there with the Army of the Dead and Hood, and all these people are fighting over the Chaos and Darkness warrens, warring against each other inside the sword. All of these forces in Darujistan are fighting for the sword in our realm, or in the world as it is. So there's this great scene where the hounds are entering. We see from like a man on the plains. Is this great like scene where he's like, I've lived here all my life and I love this and I will never leave no matter what happens. And then just like one moment with the hound coming through his house, I think, if I remember correctly, and he's like, I'm gonna move. So the hounds come and just cause devastation in Darujistan, because Shadow Throne, despite being sort of involved in this plot, also kind of wants the sword. And this is when Carso Orlon enters Darujistan, and he sees what happens, and we're not sure how much he comprehends, but he is going to defend Traveler and Dragnaper. Eventually Traveler stands up. Barathol also gets involved here. I mentioned already, this is where Cutter comes, and now he says, I'm Crocus, and they sort of stand together and defend from the hounds, and a big bear, as people are starting to come and are drawn to all of this power. There's also an amazing standoff between Krupp and Iskaral Pust, the duel of the crazies, one might say, and they're both on mules, because they both have, that weird relationship with their mules, which I didn't really realize till this scene. And they just like are two incredibly powerful people. We've seen both of them do powerful things in the past, and now we see just like this, they don't like kill each other, it's just this incredible sorcery that is delaying them. At the same time, Envy and Spite are fighting with this crazy imagery of like magna being thrown everywhere and this like sisterly rage. And somehow Erikson captures like sibling rivalry, but on this epic magical god level. I don't know how he does it in such few pages, but it's glorious and awful and terrible. All of this is happening at once. This ending is insane. Insanity. It's truly insanity, but so much heart in all of it. We also need to mention that from way back in House of Chains, Karsa's literal demons come back to haunt him in the scene of two women, young women, who are, we learn, his daughters from when he was awful in House of Chains and just wanted to pillage and rape and destroy the world. And so he's shamed, and it's literally like his sins embodied in front of him because of what he did to these girls' mothers. We actually don't see their conversation or their reconcile in this book. And this convergence also is reflected in what's happening back in Black Coral, because at the same time, holding back other powers that are trying to take over the realm of darkness is Endis Salan, who is drawing on the power of this dark river that I think is supposed to be like in Karkanos or around Karkanos, but is manifested in the world in some way. And remember, he's like this weakened wizard, but in some ways he taps into his old strength and is able to hold off the dying god. Remember the Kellic and everything that I talked about? The dying god is possessing Clip and using his desire for revenge in trying to destroy the world. They think Anomander Rake is there, but it's just Endis Salon, but he still is like lashing out with anger, this dying god / Clip, and this is where we get Namander's final huge moment where, very much like Anomander Rake, he kills the dying god with the help of Endis Salon, and both of them find redemption in that Namander is finally taking action, and actually we see at the end he's sort of taking over the Anomander Rake role as sort of king of the Tistandi, which is a huge departure from sort of this sad, moping person that we've had for most of the work until basically in mid-Toll the Hounds. After his events inside the old Azath house with Gothos, we see a character change where he becomes more decisive, more leader-like, and realizes his strength. And this is really like that final triumphant moment. And it's reflected in the whole Tist-Andi storyline. Like, they have this triumphant moment in Anomander Rake's sacrifice and in him finding redemption. And so that they, as a people now, are, in their own eyes at least, redeemed from the wrongs of what they did to Mother Dark and have been united, and now they have purpose again in their people. So all of these storylines are reflecting one another, including the storyline of the Cult of the Redeemer. Remember back, I'm sure this is going to be a super long video, but remember back to the Seer Doman, who he himself has obviously a lot of baggage from the Panionian Seer, and he finds his redemption with the actual Redeemer himself, Ithkovian, who now is godlike and so not quite as human as he was obviously in Memories of Ice. They are being attacked by the dying god again through his possession, through Kellic, of the high priestess of the Cult of the Redeemer. Her name is Salind, I believe. Yes, Salind. And she is like dancing this dangerous sexual dance that is physically attacking the Redeemer and trying to kill him. He, because of his nature, won't attack back, but he's being defended by the Seer Doman. This is where those themes of redemption are thickest in the sense of like most explicitly stated, and so this is where I really want to get into that big theme of what redemption is. So I think early on in the novel, this is in my edition at page 380, Erikson really goes after what I think most people's perception of what redemption means is, and he does this through this conversation between Anomander Rake and Spinnick about the Cult of the Redeemer. And obviously choosing the name Redeemer, I think, is a very obvious reflection of a misuse, I will say, of Christianity and the ideas around it that has obviously been central to how Western Europe and the United States and much of the Western world has been reflected. So I think, understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying this is anti-Christian, but I think this is going against a way of looking at redemption, especially in the context, potentially, of the religious past of the West. The Redeemer is a most helpless god, Anomander Rake said after a time, unable to refuse, unable to give. A sea sponge swallowing the entire sea, then the next one, and the one after that. Can it go on forever? But for Ithkovian, I would think not. Is that a sort of faith, Lord? Perhaps it is. It is ability to forgive truly endless? To take on the pain and guilt of others for all eternity. I admit I have some serious difficulties with this cult's root tenets. Oh, as I said, I greatly admired Ithkovian, the shield anvil of the Grey Swords. I even understand to some extent his gesture with the Crone Talana Mass. As the Redeemer, however, I cannot but wonder at a God so willing to assume the crimes and moral flaws of its followers, while in turn demanding nothing. No expectation of a change in behavior, no threat of punishment should they continue to transgress. Absolution. Yes, I grasp the notion, but absolution is not the same as redemption, is it? The former is passive. The latter demands an effort, one with implicit sacrifice and hardship, one demanding all the higher qualities of what we call virtues. Spinnick says, yet he is called the Redeemer, because he takes on the task of redemption for all who come to him, all who pray to him. And yes, it is an act of profound courage, but he does not expect the same of his people. He appears to possess no expectations whatsoever. So, Again, I think this is Erikson going after a faulty view of what redemption means. He says redemption is meaningless if it doesn't demand things. A demandless redemption is worthless. That is what Anna Mandarake says about this cult of the Redeemer, and that is what even the Redeemer himself struggles with. Not demanding selflessness and action, and as Anna Mandarake says, what we call virtues. And I think Erikson is saying this very particularly. Both literarily, redemption arcs happen all the time that aren't earned, but even in a grander scheme, obviously, the theme of redemption is grander than just a momentarily something that happens and you are absolved. Absolution is not the same as redemption. That's what we're getting at here. Absolution is not the same as redemption. And if we think of all the major characters in this work, that is a key, that they are not redeemed in a moment, they are redeemed over a long period of time and in their selfless action. Anamander Rake, for what the wars that he caused and the rift with Mother Dark, he now is reunited with her through self-sacrifice. Carso, for his early sins, he has to continue to act in this redeemed way, and it's a question mark of whether he will in fact do that, but it's obvious he has tried to learn from the sins of the past and do better in his discussion with Samar. Murillo, his womanizing habits, several of his abuses that he has done, he eventually turns to being in love with this one woman and sacrificing his entire self for that. Crocus finally is able to give up this image of himself for this image of other people that he wants to be, and as Salon does in fact give his life in this sacrificial, selfless sacrifice to allow the Tistandi people to survive. So there is this constant theme of this redemption coming through self-sacrificial love, as well as acting virtuously. Stony, now this is different because she is wronged in the rape, and so she is dealing with a much different thing. Sometimes that can be called guilt, but primarily it's trauma. But she is able to get through that. It's not redeemed because, again, she didn't do anything wrong, but through finally being reunited with Harlow and being loving with that, she can start to heal. There's this constant thread of redemption is not absolution for what one has done. It is learning and demanding from what you have done wrong and doing better in the future. And that is also lines up with Erikson's reflection on the past, on history, on it being a repetition of what we have done, and that we can't just pretend like what happened in the past is done, is completed, and has been redeemed, or it's already done, nothing more, but to deal with that past honestly and to allow that to demand on us in the present a different way of acting and living in a better sense, and dealing with grief and wrong and trauma rather than trying to leave it in the past. It's a huge theme of this work, but definitely of the Malazan work as a whole in the midst of this incredibly amazing visual beauty. So all of this to say is this is what the Redeemer recognizes in sort of his final moments, and so he is able to, through his self-sacrifice, basically hold Salind and basically take all of her pain in a real redemption, not just an absolution. And this is what finally defeats the dying god. He is defeated at the same time by Namander, physically killing him, and then sort of emotionally, this beautiful picture of rage and anger at the world is solved by true recognition of what one has done and seeking to live better. That's how to defeat that idea. And so the effects of the Kellic and the dying god as a whole is done away with by this loving embrace. And I wanted to end recognizing what I think is the happiest ending to the book, which is Barenthal and Scalara actually getting together. Again, two people who are very broken, finally sort of being content with someone who is loving them for who they are and for basically in self-sacrificial ways caring for the other person. That's beautiful. I really like Barenthal's plot through the entire book anyway. I think it's a very interesting anti-capitalist story right in the middle of the rest that is going on. Erikson did this a lot in Midnight Tides, but he attacks the economic systems of guilds and those in power, keeping out those who don't have power from gaining riches and from gaining the rightful fruits of their labor. I think I always love those sort of critiques being thrown into fantasy works. And then I love that the ending, despite the sadness, obviously, of Chao dying, that those two characters getting together and assumedly having a happy life together in Darujistan, I think is a very happy ending. So this is definitely going to be my longest spoiler review, but this is the longest book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, so it makes sense. I love Toll the Hounds. I think it has everything that the Malazan series has to offer. Incredible world building, incredible characters, complex themes, and yet a unifying sort of thrust of story that has many applications and makes you think. And then just a lot of fun individual moments and epic fantasy thrill rides and creativity, and it really has just everything in one. For me, this is a 10 out of 10. Perfect book. I said before, the one thing that kind of slows it down is the Namander storyline, but the more I think about it, the more I think that that doesn't do enough to take away from all of the other incredible things that happen in the work. So Toll the Hounds is a 10 out of 10 for me. Fantastic, perfect book for what it is. Please, let's talk about this in the comments below. An incredible work, an incredible book. What did you think about it? What do you think about my opinions? Is it a 10 out of 10? Is it the best Malazan book? Who knows? Also, please subscribe to the channel and check out some of my other reviews, like this video, of course. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, first in, last out.